Welcome back to 21 Questions with My Manager. I'm Anna, your host, and today we'll be talking yet to another manager about team management, but today we'll talk about the particularities of managing creative teams and creative people. So hi Nick, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yo, I'm Nick. So I'm the founder of Storm & Shelter, one of the co-founders of Storm & Shelter. We're a production house that does a film, animation and video. And we do a bit of everything, to be honest, from sort of campaign films, animation, TV commercials, social content. I guess pretty much everything that moves, we've done it.
In a few words, how are you feeling today?
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good. You know, we've had a really rare run of really nice weather here in Wales.
Tell us, in your role as a manager, what is it that you do?
I've pretty much done a bit of everything since we started. You know, for a fair few years, I was doing a lot of production work. So as a producer, pretty much like project management, I guess, in our industry. But then I guess over the past couple of years, that's changed because we've brought in sort of a production team now, so that my focus is a bit more on sales and marketing. So wearing that hat for a bit until we've got someone to sort of fill those shoes.
How long have you been a manager?
So I guess I've been a manager probably since we started, which is a good sort of seven and a half years ago. So yeah, since our first employee, really.
How do you start your day?
We start every day at Storm & Shelter with just a stand-up at the start of the day. Pretty sort of a normal thing for most people. But we just, do a nice 15 minutes at the start of the day where everyone can sort of share what their plans for the day are, like what they're looking to work on. What
made you start Office Vibe in the first place?
And then I came across sort of Office Vibe and thought, okay, let's give it a go. And yeah, it's just been really great. It's been a right mixture of being able to like look after all the one-on-one stuff, been great for the pulse survey stuff as well. Like that's super helpful. And I think, that, you know, it's a big thing for it is the fact that it looks really good. And especially when you work with a team of creatives, they're not going to use anything that looks a bit rubbish. So, but yeah, I mean, overall, it's been a really good experience so far. And yeah, I'm looking forward to keeping on using it.
I love that. That's very particular that I love that. It just looks nice too. You mentioned a few of its features, but do you have a particular one that is your favorite?
Yeah, so I think like having the agendas stuff on the one-on-one side of stuff is really helpful. It's super helpful. And some of the conversation starter stuff as well is really good. But I think my sort of like standout stuff for me and what helps, you know, across the business really is those sort of like pulse survey stuff, where, you know, people can just chip in and give an idea of what they're feeling about a bunch of different stuff over the weeks.
In your opinion, how would you describe team management in the filmmaking, video editing industry?
I know that others in the space around our similar size, like, don't really tend to think about this kind of stuff that much. And I think that's sort of symptomatic of a lot of these companies having, you know, a founder owner who's also really involved in the making.
What are some of the challenges of a manager would face when you're dealing with a creative team?
I think that, you know, having to deal with personalities, you know, kind of maybe generalizing when thinking that, you know, creative people tend to have like very exaggerated personalities, but well, I can speak for my team and tell you that's true. But I think, you know, they're amazing because of their sort of personalities and imaginative nature. But I think it's easy to generalize and think that makes them difficult to manage. But actually, I think, you know, it's more about using them in different ways, I think, is where you can really see the advantage of it. The issue, I think, is, you know, feedback can be really tough. Like you're saying, you know, they can be very connected to the work and a lot of emotion goes into it. And when feedback comes in, that can often feel like a personal attack.
And on the flip side, what are the most rewarding aspects of managing a creative team?
It's the same kind of thing, right? It's ideas. Like creative people come up with creative ideas, and you know, you can definitely lean on them a lot more for some problems you may have.
Giving feedback to any type of team, creative, not creative, it's always going to be tricky. But because we're talking about that personal connection and extension of oneself to the work, giving feedback to creative people can be tricky. Do you have any specific tips you've learned along the way?
The main thing for that kind of stuff is from what we've learned, it's understanding people's personality types and getting to know them personally as well.
how would a feedback session looks like?
Well, I think that it's number one, it's making sure that, you understand the person you're giving feedback to, if possible. If you work closely with people, you can understand them and get a good idea of how they might react to a certain way that you might sort of present that information. But on presenting that information, it's making sure there's enough context there.
Do you have one key learning that you learned pretty quickly in your career as a manager?
I would say one of the most important things that, I've learned, and I think especially as a founder as well, is quite pertinent, which is that not everyone's going to get along. If you kind of hear of something or notice something's not going right, it's jump in on that as soon as possible. It's being able to jump into it and go, right, okay, what's going on here? What can we sort out? And figuring out a route forward with it.
If you could have a superpower as a manager, what would it be?
Probably be a case of being able to, almost like telekinesis, but not quite as cool, but just being able to zip everything from my brain into a digital form.
What type of culture do you think is needed at the core in a team that is full of creative people?
There's a lot of aspects that make up the culture of an organization. But I think one of the most important things especially when dealing with a sort of a creative team, is openness and honesty. The more that people can be open and honest, the more they can trust each other.
So if your team could describe you in a few words, what do you think they would say?
I mean, what I'd like to think they'd say. Probably confident. Yeah, I would say. Probably charismatic, maybe, potentially. And hopefully dedicated.
What would you tell managers they can do to help creative people develop their careers within a company without the need of maybe becoming a freelancer, but staying and thriving in a company?
Pretty much just having a solid line of communication so that people can be able to express how they're feeling about a situation. I guess going back to the open and honesty side of things, right? It's them being able to have that, the confidence in being able to go, hey, look, maybe I could be stretched a little bit here. Actually, maybe I'm thinking of maybe doing this. We've had people come and go, actually, maybe I think I might want to do management. I might think I want to run the team. And it's okay, cool. That's great. Let's explore that a little bit. And I think, it's being able to sort of give them the guidance and take the time to be able to give them feedback on how they're doing, giving them small responsibilities as they go and things like that to test things out.
You touched on this design of having these conversations. Possibly they could be on one-on-ones. And so a lot of managers tend to put these goals on Office Vibe so their team can follow. But when I was thinking about this, I was curious to know, how do you co-create goals with a creative team and how those goals really look like?
As a project-based thing is a bit more sort of creative led. It's less of a case of, people having solid KPIs. That's easy, in that case, to put those goals in for people.
Any tips on how to keep up with a busy agenda as a manager?
That's the golden question, isn't it? That's the million dollar question. The classic thing is making time for yourself and your team. Blocking out time is really important. And I mean, how many books and blogs tell you to do it, and it's so easy just to put it in a calendar and go, oh yeah, well, it's in the calendar. Yeah, I'll do that. And you never do, because you end up getting dragged into something else.
Do you have one or two things you can mention when it comes to being effective with the way you give feedback?
For us, effective feedback is doing it directly to the person, actually approaching them personally. And ideally in this situation, obviously, we can't necessarily do it as face-to-face, but just in a call.
How do you help your team manage with their emotions?
It's being respectful of other people's, I guess their vulnerability. If people are presenting work, they're going to be in a vulnerable state because they're going to be okay, this is what I've poured my heart and soul into. Try not to be so brutal with it.
We talked about emotions, feedback, development, your career. What is one last piece of advice that you would give to any manager that is looking at this? Just one last piece of gold.
I would say, don't hesitate to give people responsibility.
You gave us so much learning lessons, tips. Thanks so much for your time. This was 21 Questions with a Manager. We'll see you soon.